This is a story about how things can go wrong when you don't receive exactly what you expected after having placed an order for a watch on Chrono24. We're going to talk about returning watches that you don't wish to keep, both to private and to professional sellers. It is a cautionary tale that I lived through, so you won't necessarily have to, and that may offer some worthwhile tips to any watch enthusiast. In short, I received 3 watches in a row that were not as described, so I wanted to return them. But what happens if the seller does not want it returned? What does Chrono24 do? What does the law say? What actually happens? Even though I'm a little on the fence about some of the business ethics of Panerai, we will leave that for another story, I've always liked their utilitarian design, just not their sizes. But visiting one of my local watch shops on a Friday afternoon, I see an interesting pre-owned specimen in the window. It is unmistakably a Panerai, but it is certainly not 44 or 47 millimeters wide. I snap a picture to make a note of the model number, go home and go online. The PAM 00050, this is the model number, turns out to be a 40mm watch that looks exactly like the classic Panerai, only smaller. I am intrigued. A little more research and I find that the PAM 00048 is the same watch, just with a leather strap, and since I'm not a bracelet man, I concentrate my search on this model. As I speak now, about 2.5 months later, I have, very briefly, owned 3 PAM 48s, all bought on Chrono24 and all returned. I have bought many watches on Chrono24 and I've never had such bad luck. I would never say that the correlation between being a Panerai owner and being dishonest is higher than, say, owning an Omega or a Blancpain and being dishonest. But anecdotally, this was my experience. The information I got from these 3 Panerai owners all turned out to be wrong to a higher or lesser degree, and because of it, I ended up diving deep into the world of making returns on Chrono24. Panerai number 1 didn't cause me too many problems. The French seller I returned the watch to was graceful and accepted that the watch I had bought had oxidized hands, which wasn't visible on his pictures and was not mentioned pre-purchase. The hands would need to be replaced, and oxidation is caused by moisture getting into the case, so there could be all sorts of hidden problems with this Panerai. He accepted, I returned the watch, got a full refund, and that was the end of that. So this was Panerai number 1, and also return scenario number 1. You buy from a private seller, the seller accepts the return, no problems. But here starts the cautionary tale. Another potential candidate for a buy is for sale around the time I return Panerai number 1, and I start investigating this instead. This time, the seller is in Belgium. This watch is also advertised as a full set with box and certificate, which I was looking for as Panerais are so heavily faked. I would never buy a watch-only Panerai, especially from a private seller. The watch looks pretty good in the pictures, only hairlines are visible, but the photos are slightly blurry snapshots from a phone, so I can't tell exactly what I'd be buying here. I write the seller and ask him a few questions, including 1. It's a little hard to assess all scratches on the case on the pictures. Are they all hairlines or is there something deeper? And 2. Are there any scratches on the sapphire, or is this in perfect condition? A couple of hours later he answers, quote unquote, that the sapphire is perfect. Make a mental note of that. A perfect sapphire. With regards to scratches on the case, he tells me nothing is deep, except one in a picture that he includes. That scratch isn't too bad. It's on the bezel, and if I wanted to later, it could be polished into extinction. So it's starting to look good. If that's the only deep scratch, we should be good. However, I think the price is a bit high for the watch, which does not have documentation for the latest service and which does have a fair amount of smaller scratches. But I make an offer and the seller responds just a minute later with a counter-offer. I reject, as I think the price is still a bit too high, but over the coming days, it becomes clear to me that the seller is very keen to sell. He suddenly contacts me on Facebook Messenger too. I'm not exactly sure how he found me there, as I'd only given him my first name and my location, but there we are. It's a little weird, but he's friendly enough, if a little too eager. The reason he's writing to me directly is that he wants to avoid paying Chrono24's fee. By making the trade outside of Chrono24, there is, of course, no commission to pay. Now, I'll be the first to admit that Chrono24's commission can be excessive, especially for more expensive watches. Chrono24 does not use tiers but a flat rate commission of 6.5%. So if you are selling a €10,000 watch, Chrono24 will bag €650 before sending the remaining €9,350 to you. That is a lot of money for one sale, and Chrono24 would be well served by introducing tiered commission rates, so the percentage was higher for cheaper watches and lower for more expensive ones. For a €10,000 watch, Chrono24 would still pocket €300 if the commission was 3%. Not too bad, as Chrono24 is in effect a marketplace for sellers to connect with buyers. Chrono24 doesn't actually sell anything. That said, sometimes things get a little hairy, so Chrono24 will have to invest resources into smoothing out issues when trades go wrong, which we will see a lot more of now. Now, the Belgian seller has just contacted me on Facebook Messenger. He offers me a more attractive price, but only if the deal is made directly without the Chrono24 middleman. But there's a key problem with that setup, because aside from letting sellers meet buyers, Chrono24 offers an essential service: an escrow account. As you of course know, an escrow account holds a payment with a third party when a financial transaction is being made. It's just a virtual box to temporarily hold money. The seller of a good does not receive the buyer's payment directly. Only when the buyer is satisfied that he has received what was agreed, he will tell the third party, in this case Chrono24, to release the payment held in escrow to the seller. So the buyer is essentially prepaying, but without the risk of the seller sending him a Twix instead of a Patek Philippe and running away with all the money. The seller, on the other hand, will only ship the good when the third party informs him that the payment has been paid into the escrow account. Now, I asked the seller if he's offering to send me the watch and let me pay later. His response: when someone sells something, it's the buyer who pays first. It seems to be logic. That one makes me smile a little. No, that's not me. And there you have all the explanation you need for why escrow accounts are useful. We go back and forth a couple of times, and I eventually tell him that his price is too high, and that is that. Mentally, I have now walked away from the deal. It is all getting a bit too much now, with Facebook Messenger bypassing Chrono24 to save a few percent, and many messages about the price. Just 23 minutes later, I receive a new message on Messenger that he will make a video call with me after dinner. Now it's really getting too much. I'm buying a watch. Discussing things in writing is just fine and better to keep a record. But I don't want to make a video call to receive a sales pitch, and I ignore the call that comes in a bit later. A few hours later still, I get yet more messages. He goes on about the supposed normal price of this watch in this condition and how much I can save by trading with him. He's pushing hard for a sale now, and it's getting a tad uncomfortable. I ignore him. More messages. The next one says, "Watch is very good, and if I like this model, I will be happy with it." It's a bit like standing in a Bangkok flea market now. Later, he asks again, "We close the deal? What do you propose for mine?" Despite my better judgment, later that evening, I write the fatal message. I can't offer more than my original offer, i.e. $4,150 plus shipping. I really feel that is the right price, and that paying more would be overpaying. Now he seems to suddenly accept this offer that I originally had made 3 days earlier and have stuck to since. And we agreed that I make my offer over on Chrono24. This is November 30th, 2022. I sleep on it, and my instinct tells me to walk away from this deal. I don't trust this seller, and I'm not confident the watch will be as described. I also foresee problems if I wish to return it. So, the next day, I write a message on Chrono24. I am ready to send you an offer of $4,225 including shipping. Before I do, could you just confirm that you will accept the return? I have no intention of returning and will only do so if there is an issue with the watch that has not previously been discussed. I also just want to agree on the scope of the delivery. Watch, original and stamped warranty card, box including tools, etc., deploying clasp and buckle, 4 straps. This is what the watch is shown with on the pictures, and I want to be absolutely sure. I now get a response in French. Up until now everything has been in English. He confirms the content of the delivery, but writes, "I will not accept the return on the condition of the watch as it has been described by a photo." That's Google Translate for you. So, that's definitely the end of it for me. I mentally now walk away from this trade yet again and reply. Then, we don't have a deal. There could be a mechanical issue with the watch that is not visible on photographs, and I always need an option to return a watch if such a problem is present. Or there could be a problem with the case that is not easily visible on the photographs. These are snapshots from a mobile phone and slightly out of focus. I now get a stream of messages from the seller on both Chrono24 and on Messenger, 5 in total within about an hour. I'm too old for this stuff and I should just have walked away, of course, but in the end, the seller now tells me a return is okay if you see a mechanical problem or other problem that I have not shown to you. I stay silent for a few hours. He then writes back, "We make the deal?" Of all the watch trades I have made in the past, this is the one that comes closest to trading 10 kilos of uncut Colombian heroin or a truckload of Kalashnikovs. I have a philosophy about being open and transparent about almost all things in life. My experience is that it leads to more success and less stress in the long run. So I write to the seller. I have to say I'm nervous about this watch. I've bought quite a few on Chrono, but I've never felt as unsure before making an offer as I am now. It didn't help that you refused an option to return to start with. This makes everything much more risky as a buyer when buying an expensive object online based on some snapshots from a smartphone. And the extra risk is not reflected in the price in my opinion. I will need another day to think about this. The next day I check the market again. There aren't any other suitable PAM48s for sale at the moment, except one, and that's in the UK. After the madness of Brexit, it's not really feasible buying from the UK anymore, and I want to put things to bed. And so, my conclusion is something along the lines of, what the heck, let it play out and let's see what happens. Sometimes there can be a slight thrill involved with walking into something a little dodgy. Walking away from that dimly lit side road can sometimes seem too safe, too restricted. But at the same time, we also want some certainty that we won't end up lying on the ground with our pants down and our wallet gone, or worse. So, it's December 2nd and I write back. Okay, I will now make an offer on the condition that the watch can be returned within 7 days after me receiving it. If there are any defects not clearly visible on the pictures, or if there is a mechanical problem, please only accept my offer if we agree on this condition. He accepts, now sounding convivial. When you buy with Chrono, you have, I think, a few days to check it before confirming the deal. It's the security of the site, so no worries. On Chrono24, you request an offer from the seller with a price suggestion attached. I do this, and a few minutes later, I get a formal offer that I can then confirm to place the actual order. I have some last-minute hesitation again. The chance of this going wrong is high. 3.5 hours later, the seller writes back. Did you accept the offer? I didn't receive any confirmation. I give in. The dimly lit side road calls me. I accept the offer and place the order. It's done. At this point, you may ask what happens if you don't make the payment into the escrow account. Well, nothing really. Technically, you have now placed an order and you are obligated to pay, but if you don't within 3 days, the order is just cancelled. So, in a sense, you have committed, but the commitment will lapse by itself if you take no further action. I hesitate. For 3 days. The best way to make a payment on Chrono24 in Europe is via bank transfer. If you use a debit or credit card, you might end up paying a fee on top of the price, depending on the currencies involved. But a bank transfer made in Europe falls under single euro payments area regulations, meaning your bank can't charge you more for a transfer than they would for a domestic transfer. Even the UK is a member of SEPA, as it's called. Now, let me stress, you should not pay by bank transfer to most shops you buy from. If you buy with a card, you have an inbuilt protection, since you can require a so-called chargeback from your bank or card provider. This essentially means that a payment will be returned to you if you want it to be. But with a bank transfer, there is no way of getting the money back if the recipient decides to pocket it. So, only do this with large and reputable companies, such as Chrono24. Because international bank transfers take a day, and because it's the weekend, I can hold my payment for the Panerai bit without the seller really taking notice. Finally though, on December 5th, the last of my resistance vaporizes. This time I really want that peace of having made a decision and giving my mind some rest from the internal wrangling. I make the payment and transfer a total of €4,225 to Chrono24's Escrow. That's including €75 to cover expedited shipping. The next couple of days, the whole escrow machinery runs, and on December 9th I receive a package from Belgium. Before we dig into the next chapter, just a quick 15-second break where I'll present the project I'm a part of. StockPad makes it easy to keep a stock watch list with your own notes and to save articles. all in a user-friendly interface. StockPad keeps track of changes in price and makes it simple to sort and find your notes. And it's free. Good luck with your investments. It's now Sunday the 11th of December. I've had the watch for 2 days and have spent some time looking closely at it and testing its accuracy. In Chrono24's messaging system, I write my findings to the seller. The watch seems to have no mechanical problems and is running fine. It's within COSC standards and has pretty good amplitude, so no problems there. But there are more scratches on the watch than was shown in the pictures, a couple of them quite deep and more like dents. Looking closely at the sapphire, I also see some scratches on this. There's also a strap missing in the package. The watch was advertised for sale with a number of straps, but the one shown in most pictures, an original Panerai strap, is not in the package. And finally, the killing blow. The Panerai certificate is neither stamped nor signed. This was not visible on the photos in the advertisement. Now, after checking it, I don't really suspect the watch is fake, but a non-stamped, non-signed certificate is an alarm bell going off. Even if the watch is genuine, which I'm convinced this particular Panerai is, this will decrease the value of the watch. The next potential buyer may, justifiably, walk away from a deal with a non-stamped certificate, so the resale price drops notably without a stamp and signature on the certificate. The watch has no provenance. When you buy a watch, you may think you will never sell it again. It's the honeymoon after all. But just remember that a divorce may lurk out there in the future. We tire of most things over time and need novelties. So when you do buy, stay cool and prepare for the day you want to sell. That doesn't mean you shouldn't buy watches without stamped and signed certificates. I've bought several watches where the certificate was long gone. But make sure that this is reflected in the price you pay, because you will get less for it when, one day, just maybe, that magical piece you're about to buy will seem mundane and you want to replace it with something more novel. So I write a polite message to the seller, listing the problems and that, I'm sorry, but I would like to return it. I'm sure you can sell it again fairly quickly. The watch is okay, but I have some requirements for the ones I buy for my collection. The seller responds 1 hour later. Now, remember that thing I asked you to make a mental note of. Before buying, I asked the seller, are there any scratches on the sapphire, or is this in perfect condition? The seller replied, quote unquote, the sapphire is perfect. I have now told the seller that there are scratches on the sapphire, and he responds, the sapphire can't be perfect if you buy a second-hand watch, so the watch is perfect for 2016. That's the year the watch was produced. So the definition of perfection has certainly changed between pre-purchase and post-purchase. The seller continues, so I don't accept your return. You cannot choose like this. You should take 8,000 euros and buy a new one if you want a new, not 4K. So tomorrow I will call Chrono24 and they will decide. My watch is perfect and full set like I said. So tomorrow I call Chrono24 to explain that. I knew that I will have problems with you. I reply, we have arranged the return to be possible and you have confirmed this in writing here. You communicated that the sapphire was perfect, and it certainly can be perfect on a used watch. I have several. The certificate has no marking whatsoever, i.e. no stamp, no signature. You're welcome to call Chrono24 and tell them that you knew you would have problems with me. What an unpleasant thing to write. This is an online transaction, and sometimes online transactions don't work out. That's just what happens, and that's why Chrono24 has an escrow system. He responds, escrow is for checking the watch to see if it's original. The sapphire is good. You don't see apparent big scratches. This, of course, is nonsense. This is not just what the escrow account is for. I report to Chrono24 that I wish to return the watch. There is a dedicated functionality for this. You need to state your reason, and I write, I wish to return the watch. The original warranty certificate is unstamped and without a signature. This was not communicated by seller. The watch case has more scratches than communicated. The sapphire has scratches despite it being communicated by the seller that it did not. The seller gets a copy of this and now starts to waver a little. I get some short erratic messages. By the way, I pay 82 euro for sending the watch. You have to send it back to me if you return the watch. You opened the watch? And finally, I don't like to send 2x my watch with UPS. They don't take care of it while driving. What are you suggesting, I ask, inviting him to offer alternative shipping options if his concern is now the driving abilities of UPS's staff. A minute later. What's the problem? I don't understand. The watch is 2016, so 6 years I bought it like this to wear it. It's not a wall clock. I respond. The problem is what I have described. We all have different criteria when buying things. You have miscommunicated certain things and failed to communicate others, and I wish to return it. That is all. We go back and forth a few more times, him claiming that since the watch is, in his mind, in good condition for a 2016 watch, the transaction is correct, as he puts it. The next day he's back with more messages, and this is where the actions of Chrono24 also start to get a little fishy, shall we say. Before we move on, I need to say that in a past life I was the CEO of a pan-national marketplace that operated in much the same way as Chrono24 does, so I know the law in this area. Basically, if you are trading within the EU and the seller of a good is a business, you have 14 days to return the goods without giving any reason whatsoever. It's irrelevant whether the goods received were exactly as described or not. Either way, you have the right to return them all for a full refund. For the time being, and this is February 2023, this rule also applies in the UK post-Brexit, as the UK has retained many laws stemming from the good old EU days, but who knows where the UK is going these days. Importantly, the right to return also applied to used goods, but equally important, the seller of the Panerai we are discussing today is not a business, but a private individual. So, legally speaking, I'm actually in a mess, but I'm still quite calm about the situation. Chrono24, however, are a bit confusing on their pages. They write that you have a legal right to return a watch within 14 days if it is not as advertised. But this is wrong information. You have a right to return it whether it is as advertised or not. It is the so-called cooling off period or right of withdrawal, and it also applies to used goods as you can see here. So, stating that you only have the legal right to return a watch within 14 days if it is defective or not as advertised is simply wrong, and this is not a good move by Chrono24. You can return your watch just because you want to and you don't need to tell anyone why, but obviously Chrono24 doesn't want you to, as they lose their commission and resources may be required to smooth out issues. With private sellers they are a little more clear that things could get tricky, but it's still vague. No legal obligation to accept returns. What exactly does that mean? It doesn't say no returns, only that there's no legal obligation for the seller to accept the return. So, what? The answer is that Chrono24 will now step in and mediate. And this is why I'm quite calm. I have an open and shut case, you would think, and Chrono24 is protective of their reputation. They know that trading luxury goods that cost 5, 10 or 100,000 euros online rests entirely on the platform being trusted by all parties, and them keeping both sellers and buyers happy. So, in my mind, Chrono24 will simply politely instruct the seller to accept the return, and that will be the end of that. That's not exactly what happens next though. The next day, this is now December 12th, I get another message from the seller. He has come up with a proposal for a settlement that he has seemingly also communicated to Chrono24. He writes, "You have to keep the watch. If you want to return it, I ask you to pay 250 euros for cancelling cost plus 85 euros for delivery cost. The watch is described as occasion and the warranty card is inside. The original set is complete as described. I told you okay for returning if mechanical problems and no problem plus watch original, so you have to respect your order condition." As we have seen, this is of course untrue. Pre-purchase, the seller confirmed he would accept the return for any issue that had not been clearly communicated either via text or images. So, asking to be paid 335 euro to accept the return of the watch is simply absurd and frankly a little bit insulting. I really do not like dishonesty, and this is clearly exactly that. Now, at the same time, I receive a message from Chrono24. He is the person who, for the next 11 days, it turns out, will try to mediate a solution. Raffaele writes, "Please send me pictures of the problem with the watch in order to try to find a situation to this case." He of course means solution here, but also note the following lines. "We will keep the mediation open and the funds blocked until both parties find an agreement." Now, the next few minutes will expose some rather significant issues with how Chrono24 handles these cases, but it's worth making note of this. Chrono24 actively steps in to resolve the problem, and the security of the escrow account means that your payment is safe. I ask Raffaele why Chrono24 wants to see pictures. The mere fact that the seller has explicitly accepted a return before the trade should be enough, you'd think. Chrono24 comes back to me. Indicates he needs written proof. I'm not sure what means by this, given that he can see that the seller agreed to accept the return before I bought the watch. The seller has also mentioned that you have checked the watch and there are no authenticity issues. Therefore, it shouldn't be a problem with the warranty card. There are no authenticity issues, he writes. Says who, I think to myself when I read this. Yes, I think the watch is genuine, but therefore it shouldn't be a problem with the warranty card. I don't think so. And is this really what the world's largest platform for trading luxury watches think? Unstamped and unsigned warranty cards are, quote-unquote, not a problem. Now, do note that Chrono24 already at this early stage offers a €250 discount to me to settle the matter. That's a bit less than 6% of the sale price, and Chrono24 takes a 6.5% commission on the sale, so they aren't actually offering to give me money from the till here, but to forfeit most of their commission in order to settle the matter. That's a commendable business practice, but there are some deeper concerns here. The next day, I write a long email outlining the problems and asking very specific questions. First, I ask explicitly, if a seller in writing states on the platform that he will accept the return, do you not later enforce this if a buyer wishes to return the watch? This is absolutely key. If the buyer has made a written agreement with the seller, does the mediator then make sure that this arrangement is respected? Over the next many days, this question is never answered, despite me repeating it again and again. My conclusion is that it does not matter if you've made a written agreement with the seller visible to Chrono24. It's simply not worth the pixels it is written in. That's a significant problem for Chrono24, and changing this would be a simple solution to many of their mediation problems. They simply need to require both parties to respect whatever was agreed in writing on Chrono24's platform prior to the purchase. With regards to the unstamped and unsigned certificate, I write, from what you write, I have to conclude that you consider it irrelevant whether a warranty card is signed, stamped or not, and I have to strongly disagree. Even if the authenticity of this watch were indeed verified, a problem will arise when I wish to sell the watch one day. Any discerning buyer will, rightfully, question the provenance of a watch with an unstamped, unsigned warranty card. In short, it puts into question the authenticity and provenance of a watch, and it lowers the trading value of the watch. Why do you state that it shouldn't be a problem? Raffaele answers the next day. Regarding the warranty card, we are not able to consider it an issue. That's why we ask you to contact an official reseller from the brand that can provide a written statement of the validity of it. Note how my question is actually not answered. We'll get back to what happens with all this in a minute. I also inform Raffaele about the strap that was advertised as part of the product offered by the seller. I write, the seller hasn't even sent all the straps that were shown in the pictures in the advertisement. If you consult the pictures, you will see an original Panerai rubber strap as part of the advertisement, but the seller has not sent this as part of the package. Whether he simply forgot or if this was deliberate, I cannot say, but this is of course yet another breach of the agreement, as all items pictured in the advertisement must be considered part of the object for sale, unless explicitly stated otherwise. In their answer the next day, Chrono24 doesn't even respond to this. It is ignored. Finally, I reject Chrono24's offer of a €250 compensation. Between the unsigned and unstamped certificate, the missing original Panerai strap, the scratches on the sapphire and the previously undisclosed bumps and scratches on the case, I estimate that the value of what I have received could be close to €1,000 lower than the value of what was advertised. I do, however, offer to accept a €550 compensation if the seller will also send the missing strap. The next day, Raffaele is back with a very lacking answer. I'm basically just offered a voucher of €150 on top of the €250 I have already been offered as compensation. They're just trying to make this go away now, of course. I respond and again ask to please comment on the missing strap. I write, if buyers cannot expect the seller to ship what is advertised, and this is accepted by Chrono24, the platform has a serious problem. About the warranty card and that I can contact an official reseller for a written statement, I write to Raffaele that this will of course cost me time and money. And the point is that the watch was advertised as a full set, which by all accounts includes a signed and stamped warranty card or certificate. Why should the buyer accept to not receive this, and then be required to both go and get a written certificate himself and absorb the loss of value caused by not receiving what was advertised? It makes no sense. it's now 3 days before I hear from Chrono24 again, and the email I receive on December the 18th is lackluster to say the least. All points are ignored, and Chrono24 simply passes on 2 options conjured up by the seller. 1. I return the watch and pay a €200 compensation to him. This one is really bonkers, but it's repeated by Chrono24 here. 2. I keep the watch and the seller adds €50 to Chrono24's offer of compensation to me. And then he finishes. This is a private transaction and the solution has to be agreed upon by both of you. In case both of you don't find an agreement, we would recommend taking legal action in order to resolve the issue. That's it. None of my questions are answered, and now I'm no longer in this just to sort out the issues with this particular deal. I want to get to the bottom of exactly what Chrono24's business practices are. I use the platform often and the lack of transparency is starting to bother me. I am of course now offered a total of €450 in compensation, but on top of wanting to dig into Chrono24's practices, I don't really want to own this watch anymore. Bought from a dishonest person, it would feel tainted on my wrist forever. I'm a rational person and in most cases I can look beyond stuff like this, but I can't with this. It's a watch, it's quite a personal thing. How I acquired it means something. Watches hold stories that rub off on the wearer, and I don't want my first Panerai story to start like this. So I respond the same day. I start by asking about the legal action. Now, legal action is the last thing I want to do, but I'm probing now. I need to understand how Chrono24 works, and I need this to sound serious. There is no doubt that Chrono24 would also like to avoid any legal action being taken. It could end up with some pretty bad PR somewhere, and they know that of course. And then the more important part. I insist on transparency on their policies and put a little more pressure on them. In my previous email to you, I asked numerous questions. These included whether or not Chrono24 requires the seller to ship the exact items that are advertised for sale, and if written agreements made on Chrono24 between buyer and seller are to be respected. You have not answered these questions, and since you do not require the seller to accept a return on the order made on your platform, I can only conclude that the answer to these questions is no. Chrono24 does not enforce a policy of requiring the seller to ship what was advertised for sale on the platform. And Chrono24 does not enforce a policy of requiring the seller to adhere to written agreements. Can you confirm this? All this is key. I really want to understand this, and I need Chrono24 to understand that they are on the edge of legality here. By asking these questions, the situation also becomes a little more precarious for Chrono24. Now I play a cheap card that I prefer not to play, but I have also worked in media for many years and I'm not blind to the fact that both companies and public entities would generally like to avoid media scrutiny. So I write. I also run a YouTube watch channel, and your answers, or lack thereof, may be used in a documentary I plan to make about this particular case. I find the case very interesting in terms of what the watch community can expect from trading on Chrono24's platform. The fact that the seller can choose not to ship what was advertised, e.g. a strap, and the buyer subsequently being required by Chrono24 to resort to legal action to remedy this is somewhat alarming. The same can be said of written agreements made between the buyer and the seller essentially being worthless, as Chrono24 does not enforce a return if the seller demonstrably does not respect the written agreement. Buyers could end up losing significant amounts of money through trading on Chrono24, and I believe transparency on this matter is very important. The reply is again rather lackluster. The most important parts are: if a legal process is started, the funds will be frozen in the escrow account until the outcome of the legal process decides where the funds should be paid to, whether to the seller or the buyer. So, in the case of legal action, the seller would not receive the payment for the watch for months and months. This, in effect, means that there is no way the seller would actually continue to refuse a return if he were made aware that legal action was pending. So I'm feeling increasingly calm about the whole situation. On top of that, I would be highly surprised if Chrono24 would allow things to get this far. They are in a difficult position now. Raffaele goes on. The policy of Chrono24 is that the watch must be sold as advertised. If the watch doesn't meet the description, we open a mediation and we try to find a solution that must be agreed upon by both parties. Finally, we have Chrono24's confirmation of what is, of course, a part of the law. Goods must be sold as advertised. The confirmation means Chrono24 explicitly has to take my side on this for the rest of the mediation process. And finally, it's clear that now feels on more shaky ground. He finishes off his email with, "Tomorrow I will discuss the case internally with the department to double-check the whole process." Now there is silence for 48 hours, and then everything changes. The seller and I both receive copies of a more official-looking message with Chrono24's logo on it. The case has been brought to discussion, and the verdict is now suddenly 1. The warranty can't be empty. As the watch was listed with original documents, such documents should be filled and not empty. Therefore, the watch doesn't correspond to the listing. I will remind you of the previous communication from Chrono24 on this matter. First, it shouldn't be a problem with the warranty card. Then, later, regarding the warranty card, we are not able to consider it an issue. But now, the warranty can't be empty. I won't speculate on what brought this 180-degree U-turn about. Did they just make a mistake? Was the case now just getting too tedious for Chrono24 and they wanted it gone? Or did the prospect of some really bad press on YouTube rock the boat? I don't know, but it's not a good look for Chrono24, and this is why terms and conditions for any company should always be transparent and clearly laid out for everybody to see. The way Chrono24 is doing it now, everything just appears murky, suspicious, dubious, and trust evaporates. 2. The missing strap is also something that was shown in the listing. As the buyer has informed us that it is missing, the watch isn't as described. There, finally, after having this question ignored so many times, Chrono24 reaches the verdict it should of course have reached straight away. The buyer orders something, he only receives part of it. That's not okay, and that's the seller's responsibility. As the buyer, I should not have to spend so much time hammering this single point home to Chrono24. But at least it's finally addressed. And the final item. 3. The pictures in the listing are not close enough to notice the scratches that the buyer mentioned, so we can't say that in the listing was visible the condition, but it was listed with quote-unquote light signs of wear and scratches. I won't get into this, it's less important, but I never received a reply from Chrono24 about the written agreement made between the seller and I, that a return would be accepted if there were any scratches on the watch that were not clear before the purchase. Again, my conclusion has to be that pre-purchase communication with the seller is worthless in terms of being documentation for potential disputes. It is disregarded by Chrono24, which I find odd from a business perspective. Many cases could be put to bed much more easily by using this as documentation and requiring both buyer and seller to respect written agreements. Remember, during mediation, Chrono24 has the seller's money in escrow, so the seller has received nothing, and the buyer has a watch he's not satisfied with. So, Chrono24 has absolute power to rule on these matters. Now, of course, Chrono24 wants to keep both seller and buyer happy. They are the foundation under the business. Without satisfied sellers and buyers, there is no Chrono24. But most people will understand that a pre-purchase written agreement is required by Chrono24 to be respected. Anyway, in this case, finally Chrono24 rules that it is, quote-unquote, appropriate in this case to proceed with a return. As a final twist, note what writes at the end. As the mediation has taken longer than usual, Chrono24 is willing to cover the €200 that the seller is requesting for the return as compensation in order to close the matter. Now, I'm happy that the matter is finalized. I can return the watch, and even though it took a while, there is a sense of justice with Chrono24 requiring the seller to now accept the return. But what? Chrono24 will pay the seller €200, and I have to send the watch back and cover the shipping costs myself. Really? The, what should I call it, ruling goes against the seller, but it is the seller that is compensated. Again, Chrono24 needs to keep everyone happy, but imagine sitting in the courtroom, watching the person who robbed you on the street being convicted, but then seeing the judge send him on his way with a pat on the head and a check for his troubles, while you get to pay your own Uber fare home. It doesn't really sit well. I shoot a polite message off to One final question. Given that you have decided to compensate the seller, is there any compensation for the buyer in this case? I will have a net loss of approximately €75 to return the watch, not to mention the hours wasted on a trade where the goods were misrepresented. The seller will have a net gain of approximately €120. This does not seem very reasonable, as Chrono24 has now determined that the fault lies with the seller and not the buyer. The next day, replies, I have reached my limit for exceptional compensation. The only thing that I can offer you is a voucher for the value of the return costs that you will be able to use in future purchases on the platform. The voucher will have a value of €100. And so be it. I will buy more watches on Chrono24 in the future, and with this voucher my costs of shipping the watch back will be covered. Heck, I even walk away with a €30 profit after 2 weeks of emailing, messaging, photographing and swearing quietly at the desk. And that's the end of that. Before we leave case 2, returning to a private seller who doesn't want to return, let's say goodbye to the actual seller as well. Now, during the actual mediation process, he has sent me a few mildly insulting messages on Chrono24 that I have ignored, such as, hello, what's the issue? I need all the money or my watch. And others like, you can't choose if you want to return the watch. After the verdict from Chrono24, he writes to me, for a watch 13K, how much cost with UPS? I can't quite believe it. After all the grief and extra work he has caused me through his dishonesty, he asks me for shipping advice instead of popping onto UPS's page to get a quote himself. I imagine he's a bit embarrassed and trying to make friends in this quite strange way. And that was the end of that. He gets the watch back and €200 from Chrono24, and I get a full refund and a voucher. Now, I hope this tale will be of use to you when you shop on Chrono24. The world is a mess, but keep building a good map of it and you're going to be okay. Be extra careful when buying from a private seller. These are expensive items and there are dodgy people in the watch world. As the saying goes, buy the buyer, not the product. Try to gauge if this individual is trustworthy and be ready to walk away if things feel wrong. It can be hard, I know, if you really want that watch. I'm a skeptical and cynical bastard and I still went down that side road that I knew I shouldn't have walked down. But try. And know that if you do run into trouble, Chrono24 knows the game. They understand that nobody is served by discontent. This case does not reflect entirely well on their practices, but at the same time, I have to commend them for having a mediation department and being ready to give up their commission to settle disputes. The practices are too opaque, and you may have to pressure them more than I think is both justifiable and auspicious. But a solution will most likely be found, even if, as they ambiguously state on that FAQ page, the seller has no legal obligation to accept a return. We've done both scenarios of private sellers, the one that accepts a return without a fuss and the one that doesn't. With the third and final, Panerai 48, we will do the professional seller. In this case, it doesn't matter if the seller wants to receive the watch back or not, he or she has to. Not long after returning Panerai number 2, I see another one on Chrono24 that pretty much fits the bill. It's a full set and the starting price is in a place where I think we'll be able to agree. This time, we're in Italy, in Naples to be exact. On December 29th, I shoot off a couple of standard questions, this time adding one about the warranty card. 1. Do you know anything about the service history? 2. Is the warranty card signed, stamped? And 3. Can you describe the state of the case and the sapphire? Only hairlines on the case and a perfect sapphire, or is there something more? The seller responds in 9 minutes. A good sign. The watch was serviced in the seller's store only last month, November 2022. The certificate is signed and stamped. The case only has hairlines and the sapphire is perfect. All good, you'd think. I don't answer immediately, but the next day he messages that he hopes he's answered all my questions and wishes me a happy new year. He's not too pushy and he's polite. It doesn't say too much, of course, but this time the seller is a business and will have to accept the return, so I send an offer. A few minutes later I receive a counteroffer and a polite message that this is their best offer. Sorry. I wait 2 days. There's no pushing to sell the watch and the counteroffer is fair. It's in line with the price paid for Panerai 1 and 2 and this time it's from a shop, so there'll be a warranty too. I accept the offer and make the transfer into Chrono24's escrow account straight away. I also ask the seller to include on the receipt that the watch was serviced in November, so I'll have documentation. Everything is smooth after that, and I receive the watch 3 days after making the payment. It's January 4th, 2023. I open yet another box, and I only need to look at the watch for about 3 seconds to see we've got problems again. On the bezel is a sizable dent, and also some smaller ones near the sapphire that catch the light and make the watch look, well, scruffy. None of this was immediately visible on the pictures from the seller. Also, I throw the watch on my time grapher to test the movement. It loses 29 seconds per day. Yes, 29. And the amplitude is 213 degrees. If you don't know what that means, the amplitude is how many degrees the balance wheel in the watch's movement rotates from side to side. Ideally, you want that to be around 290 to 300 degrees, give or take, or at least close to 260, 275 if the watch is a little older. If it's less than that, the watch probably either needs a service or there's something more serious wrong with it, or both. And remember, the seller told me the watch had just had a professional service in their shop the month before. I write all this to the seller, including a picture of the dent, and let him know I wish to return the watch. The seller responds the same day. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but basically the seller claims that they have tested the watch in the quote-unquote time machine before sending it, and it ran within COSC standards. COSC standards are from -4 to +6 seconds, so we're a pretty long way off from the 29 seconds I'm measuring. The seller also writes that they don't recognize the dent and that in the 12 pictures in the ad, there is no trace of this, implying that I made the dent after I received the watch. So I checked the 12 images again, and now I know that it is there. I can actually make it out on the pictures. I sent this information to the seller, who now responds in a more humble manner, although in a slightly Italian fashion. I'm told I can return the watch and we will check it, and if there is a dent from the past, don't worry. So I don't have to worry if they sent me a watch with a dent. That's kind of them. I try to stay away from national stereotypes, and we're not going to dig into that here, but there are differences in culture, and a watch with a condition described as fair by a Japanese seller may very well be described as very good by an Italian seller. That doesn't go for everybody, and you can't generalize, but let's just say that there is a correlation here. I have lived in Italy for a fair while, so I have a little experience with the culture. To the seller's credit, they offer to pay the return shipping, and a little later he also offers a €350 discount if I keep the watch. It's not an unreasonable offer, but with all the dents and the bezel and the movement potentially having serious issues, it's not one I want to take. I write back. Thanks for the offer, but with the movement losing so much time, there could be some internal issues with this watch and I wish to return it. I really wish you hadn't told me the watch was recently serviced. We just all end up wasting time and money. In any case, the watch will be sent back today with UPS. He tries to reassure me that the watch was indeed serviced in November and that he will send me the watchmaker's invoice to prove it. We are serious and trusted seller and we not lose face for a Panerai, he writes. Now, of course, if the watch was serviced in their own shop, why would the watchmaker have written an invoice, you may ask, and you would be wise too. I never actually received this receipt despite asking for it a couple of times, just because I'm curious to see what they might come up with. It's a bit of a game sometimes, I must admit. In any case, I ship the watch back and I tell the seller that if he sends me time grapher readings that reflect an actual service, I might accept their offer of a €350 discount. He agrees. He says they will service it, again, and send me the readings. It's 10 days before anything happens and I need to contact the seller to ask what's going on. He then sends me the time grapher readings he promised. He also says they have serviced the watch again, despite him claiming earlier that the watch was freshly serviced and ran within COSC standards already. The readings are better now, the amplitude is up to a healthy 307 degrees, but the accuracy is +11 to +16. The funny thing is that the seller again claims that the readings are within COSC despite them clearly being not. In any case, I have no trust in this seller anymore and I just cancel the deal. I do complain to him about all the time wasted. It's been almost a month since I bought the watch and all the testing and packaging and shipping and messaging has taken up a fair bit of my time, all because they supplied wrong information. I now receive a few petty insults such as lacking practical knowledge and being an overly fussy customer. People are often like this, of course, especially ones with a lot of pride, and you do need some pride to walk the hectic streets of Naples. Admitting a mistake means you need to adjust your self-perception. Your ego will take a hit. If you just tweak reality a little instead, you can continue to tell yourself that you have reason to be proud. You'll need to handle some cognitive dissonance, but proud people are often good at this. They can reframe anomalies to fit their preferred narrative. I digress. We're talking watches, not psychology. I can't help to point out to the seller that his time grapher setting is wrong. For a Panerai 48, the so-called lift angle should be set to 49 degrees to get an accurate reading, but he has set it to 52 in his picture. It's a little petty, I know, but I can't help it, being accused of lacking practical knowledge. But I leave it there. In the end, I get my full refund and the seller does refund my shipping costs. So I lost nothing and the seller lost around 140 euro shipping the watch across Europe twice. So there's a little justice at the end. The final twist though is that the seller originally tells me to get the refund for the return shipping from Chrono24 and then they will reimburse Chrono24. This sounds a bit strange, but I contact Chrono24 anyway. Guess who responds? Yes. Unfortunately, we are only able to refund the amount paid in this transaction. If the dealer has agreed to cover the shipping costs, please contact them through the chat of the transaction in order to provide the payment method that better suits you both. Note the words, if the dealer has agreed to cover the shipping costs. Now, I understand that and Chrono24 would prefer the two parties to sort this out between themselves, but the phrasing indicates there could also be issues with Chrono24 requiring the seller to respect the law here. I write back, I want to add the important detail that for intra-EU trades, it is mandatory that a seller bears the cost of returning the goods if the goods received were faulty or not as advertised. I receive no reply and don't chase it up as the case is now closed. I end up getting the shipping refund directly from the seller, but a word of caution here. So that's Panerai number 3. Buying from a professional dealer, you have the right to return something whether something is wrong with it or not. If you just want to return the watch because you don't like it, it's the cooling off scenario. In the EU, you have 2 weeks to make a decision to return the product. In the US, just 3 days under federal law, but various states have various regulations on top of this. You will have to pay for the return shipping, which is not trivial for expensive items that need to be insured. Depending on the cost of the watch, insured shipping can run into 3 figures. However, if something is wrong with the watch or it is not as advertised, the seller has to cover the return shipping. Chrono24 does not mention this anywhere, to their discredit, but such is the law in the EU, and as said earlier, it's the same regulation in the UK for the time being. It is also the same in the US. The Consumer Rights Act requires the seller to pay for return shipping of faulty goods. Alright, that was a crazy long story and a lot of rules and regulations, so let's finish up with a quick recap. Scenario 1. You buy from a private seller on Chrono24. You want to return the watch and the seller accepts. No problems. You'll have a hard time getting the seller to cover the return shipping, but Chrono24's escrow system works well and you'll have your money back in a matter of days. Scenario 2. You buy from a private seller on Chrono24, you want to return the watch and the seller does not accept. This is the trouble scenario, but as we have seen, Chrono24 will step in to mediate and they are solution oriented. There were quite a few shortcomings from Chrono24 in my case and you may need to put some pressure on them, which is unfortunate and should be unnecessary. But in the end, you should arrive at an acceptable outcome and Chrono24 also needs a bit of praise for having set this system up. It's a business necessity, sure, but to their credit, it's relatively effective if not transparent enough. They would do their customers and therefore themselves a great service by making a publicly available rulebook that would also help themselves to better define their own policies. Who covers the return shipping? It's a private seller, so legally speaking, the buyer hasn't got much hope, even if something is wrong with the goods. But Chrono24 will try to offer some sort of compensation, perhaps, if explicitly asked. Scenario 3. Buying from a professional seller should cause you little concern. You have a legal right to return your watch, faulty or not, and if it is indeed faulty, your return shipping should be covered by the seller. Do, however, make a note of Chrono24 not mentioning this anywhere. Chrono24 has some issues they should work on and you may have to fight your corner more than you should be required to, but overall, Chrono24 is still a good place to trade watches. You will probably have to pay a slightly higher price than if you do a local trade or trade through a forum. That 6.5% commission needs to be covered after all. But you can feel relatively comfortable that things won't end up in total disaster if things go wrong. As for me, will there be a Panerai number 4? Well, I actually gave up on the idea for a couple of weeks, but now I'm in the market again looking for that right one. But I'm taking my time. I've shipped enough Panerais across the European continent for now. The next one has to be good enough to stay, so I'm making sure that back alley is a little better lit next time. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel.